Sound suppression water is flowing.
15.
And here we go. 10, 9, 8, 7. RS-25 engines lit. 4, 3, 2, 1. Booster ignition. And liftoff. The crew of Artemis 2 now bound for the moon. Humanity's next great voyage begins.
Hello and welcome to a special edition of Gareth Jones on Speed. I'm Gareth, he's Zog.
Hello.
And he is Richard Hollingham.
Hello. It's great to be part of a special edition.
Well, it's special because you're on it, Richard.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Great to have you on.
Let me explain why Richard's here. Richard is one half of Boffin Media, who are specialists, media communicators in the world of science, engineering, technology and space technology. Richard is one half of the Space Boffins podcast, which is worth hearing, and I'll put a link to that, Richard, on the page for this episode. I can't believe I've known you. How long have I known you? 28 years?
Yeah,
like
it's
that?
about 30 years, I think, yeah.
Wow. And we've never had you on the programme. We've had your other half, Sue, on, Sue Nelson. But it's great to have you here, and we had to have you on the show. And I made that decision to have you on the show before I even knew that you were actually there for the launch of Artemis 2. You complete and utter lucky so-and-so.
Yep, I was at
How was it?
It's really difficult to describe. It was absolutely overwhelming. So I don't think any of the pictures, the video, anything completely does justice to how it felt standing there. So we were as close as you could get. So I was at the press site, which is as close as you can get to the launch, this giant rocket, knowing also that this is the first time crew have flown on this rocket.
Yep.
And then the noise was just extraordinary, this crackling noise, this that sort of tears right through you. The visuals, it was just blinding. When you get the main engine, you've got 4 main engines and then these solid rocket boosters, giant fireworks at the side of this rocket, lighting. It was like the sun. It was just so bright. And then, of course, the noise hits you after that because of the speed of sound. And so you get this huge amount of light.
What distance were you away from 39?
About 3 miles.
3 miles?
Yeah.
And it was still blinding at that
that's
distance.
and that's as close as you can get. That's as close as they allow.
Yeah.
So the press are basically the closest you can get to the rocket itself. Absolutely blinding light. And then it went off the pad really quick. And I think that's, again, the solid rocket boosters. The acceleration is apparently, I did ask an astronaut about this afterwards, it's about 3 to 4 G. So not massive, but quick. It suddenly goes to that. It's suddenly whoomph. And then it maintains that kind of speed up into orbit until you lose the solid rocket boosters.
And for something that big, and it is enormous, that is pretty decent acceleration.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's going to be quite a kick in the back for the astronauts on board. But very smooth though. I think not dissimilar, and I've never seen one in person, not dissimilar to a sort of shuttle launch, because it's essentially the same, really. It's a central section with engines on it and the solid rocket boosters at the side, only this time, instead of being bolted to the side of the fuel tank, it's on the top of the fuel tank, the capsule itself.
Yeah. The SRBs, of course, are not throttleable, are they? They are full thrust right from the very second you fire them go. They used to talk about the shuttle leaping off the pad initially, and I think it was doing 100 miles per hour before it even cleared the tower. But that's nothing to the escape velocity it's trying to achieve. I've only ever seen one launch. I watched an Atlas 1 go from John F. Kennedy Space Center in 94, I think that was, and I remember the crackling. It felt like someone pittering your skin, and that was just an Atlas, right? This is for what are the RS-25 engines from the shuttle? Is that what they call them?
Yeah, RS-25s, yeah.
And those incredible fireworks strapped to the side. Did you cry? Because I would have.
I did actually. I recorded my emotion. I did an Instagram reel straight afterwards because I thought that would be quite realistic.
Good.
And I'd found through the day, I'd been recording reels all the way through the day, and I'd found, initially you get, you'll know this. You've been doing, well, actually, I'm not sure you ever do know this because you're so good at TV, but I'm a bit self-conscious. I'm a bit self-conscious to start with these. And you sort of prepare what you're going to say a little bit.
Oh, yeah.
By this time, I've probably done about 10 through the day, at least 10. And I was just saying what I thought off the top of my head. And it was
Good.
just that sort of raw emotion. It was tearful. I think that's partly the overwhelming sensory overload of the whole thing. But also, we've been waiting, the anticipation for this mission, years, months, and then the day. And I'd been up. I was very jet lagged. I'd only arrived the day before. I'd been up, so I'd had about 3 hours sleep. I'd been up since 4, driven to the press site. I got there at 6:30, so I'd been there kind of 12 hours by the time this. So I was already quite emotionally vulnerable. And then the launch itself, yeah. I mean, it was. I've been to other launches, and I've witnessed a lot of launches from mission controls around the world. This was just on absolutely another level to anything I've seen before. And I spoke to veterans there who'd been to many, many launches, sort of local press that hang around at Cape Canaveral, and they said this was very different to anything they'd seen before.
Do we call it Cape Canaveral again now? Because for a period it was John F. Kennedy Space
Yes,
Centre.
it is
Canaveral is the US Air Force.
Yeah. It is strictly speaking the Kennedy Space Centre. The area is Cape Canaveral.
Right.
I call it Cape Canaveral because it sounds cooler, to be honest.
Yeah, it does, yeah.
Than the Kennedy Space Centre, so I just call it Cape Canaveral. Yeah, strictly speaking, Cape Canaveral is the missile station, the original missile station, which was where the first intercontinental ballistic missiles would have been launched from the US, and then the Mercury flights and the Gemini flights. And there is still the Cape Canaveral Air Force Station is still there.
They launched Dragon from, is it 41, Slick 40 and Slick 41, which is Canaveral rather than the 39B, which is part of the NASA. I don't know. I'm not certain. We'll come back to your experience in a second, Richard, but Zogger, you watched the launch. Did you have it on? Like, I had it on for hours and hours and hours, Ian. I ended up building a model of the SLS out of bits of stuff in the house just to deal with my anxiety.
I saw your pictures of the model. That's very, and you did a very good job with that, I have to say. I was riveted to the launch, and even watching that, on a TV rather than being there for the actual occasion was quite something. And I watched quite a lot of the live coverage from the capsule, which is still going on as we're recording, actually, because the mission is still in progress. But I wasn't actually watching it obsessively, I found, because at the same time it was very moving to hear the astronauts describing their experiences as they're orbiting the moon, to hear them describing their experiences. It was also a little bit kind of mundane, partly because they were orbiting so far above the moon. It's such a distant picture. There are no dramatic pictures. There's just hours and hours and hours of a very cool space capsule in the foreground, and in the background, the moon getting very slightly bigger, but not actually big enough that you see real detail on it. There are never any shots of the capsule skimming across the surface. Wonderful, shots of the lunar landscape sweeping by underneath the craft. No, none of that. And I'm sure that there will have been very useful observations made, during that trip around the moon. And it's hugely consequential in terms of the human spaceflight story. But in terms of a live TV event, to be honest, once I'd had an hour or so of capsule action, it was very background for me, and I was getting on and answering my emails and playing a bit of Call of Duty and doing whatever else I had to do.
It's the same with me when I'm watching practice in Formula One. It's on in the background and I'm doing stuff at my computer, and you lean over and see what's the latest. You're right.
Oh, right. Okay. You're waiting for the highlights as they come along.
There weren't a series of dramatic moments in the mission aside from launch. When they left the ground here, I was sat here on my own, and the poor cat leapt, because as it left the ground, I shouted, "Yeah!" at the top of my voice, and then broke into tears. I remember watching Apollo 8. I watched Apollo 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16 and 17. I watched the ASTP. I watched the Skylab launches. I watched the initial shuttle launch. I love a crewed launch. And like you said at the top, Richard, that sense of initial jeopardy where they're on board the Orion spacecraft, which has never carried humans before, and on top of the SLS, which has never carried humans before. And I was reminded of, I think, Alan Shepard's famous comment, which was, well, how would you feel sitting on top of the equivalent of a 2-megaton nuclear bomb built by the lowest bidder on a government contract? I felt the nerves. But you're right. It's great that it's mundane, though, Richard, isn't it? That there's no drama.
Yeah, absolutely. It was like Alan Shepard was in the room there. Uncanny. It's similarly. I've had it on in the background, and I love the mundane life in the spacecraft. I mean, you can watch, life on the International Space Station, but a lot of what you see of life on the International Space Station is astronauts doing experiments or spacewalks. So kind of working. What I love about this is we're seeing astronauts living. So, there was a shot the other day of
housekeeping.
Housekeeping. There was an Nutella jar went sitting across in front of the camera the other day. We've seen Victor Glover having a wash, which I quite, and we've seen Reed Wiseman on the exercise machine, and I mean it was really poignant when they were talking about being the furthest ever from Earth, and Christina Koch, you could see her wiping tears from her eyes after they'd read sort of memorial to Reed Wiseman's late wife and named a crater after her. So that's what I find pretty compelling. It's not
the human story.
The human story, and that's what I think spaceflight is all about. Ultimately, we've seen images. You can look up images of the far side of the moon. It's not like no one's ever seen it. There have been satellites that have spun around the far side of the moon, but to have humans taking those pictures with iPhones on the far side of the moon, they're having the same problems with a GoPro that I have with a GoPro, and that was quite interesting with their conversations with Mission Control. And you think about planning they've done for this. As we're recording this, the Earthrise picture has just come in, and I did ask this at the press conference immediately after the launch. I asked about what were the plans for an Earthrise picture, so the comparison with Apollo 8. And it's not really like Apollo 8, it's more like Apollo 13, where went out around the moon, not in orbit around the moon. Yeah. So it's always going to be a challenge, and they said it's going to be a challenge, but they've got it. They've got an Earthrise picture taken by people of the moon and then the Earth in the far distance. So I think that's what it is for me. It's the human story, and that lifts it above a lot of other spaceflight that we've seen.
The original Earthrise photo is hallmarked as a cornerstone in the beginning of the green movement on Earth. That first moment in which humans were able to perceive themselves, everything that we've ever known, everyone they will ever know, in one place, and it became an iconic image. I'm wondering what the effect of that similar image this time round, but lit from behind, will have on the subconscious of humanity. Does it again make us realise, as did the Apollo missions, just for one moment, that the whole planet can unite and forget its other differences? And that was significant. The Apollo space program was a significant peace initiative, in my view. It was better than fighting the Third World War on Earth. We need that now too. It's come at a good time, hasn't it? I've noticed that people who don't usually watch rocket launches were calling me and going, "Oh, this is fantastic, I'm watching this. Makes you proud." You must have been proud to witness this, Richard.
Yeah, absolutely. I actually recorded, a few people said, "Can you record messages for my mum?" From Richard, because I did a couple of messages I did a message for a group of young space ambassadors. I did a message for someone's mum from the launch site. And that's what's really interesting, actually, looking at my sort of social media is, there's a lot of people, the normal nerds, present company included, who are obviously into this sort of stuff. But it's the people who are not normally into this stuff that have been engaged with it. It's still leading.
It's a breakthrough.
Despite what's going on in the world, it is still regularly leading the mainstream media news bulletins.
Hooray.
It is the most read story, despite what is going on in the Middle East. It's the most read story on the BBC News website. You know, I know because I write for BBC Future that the engagement has been tremendous on the stories that I've written around the launch about mission control, about, you know, what it takes to be an astronaut on Artemis. You know, so there is a huge amount of engagement in this.
That's really good to hear. This can't be as consequential and as influential as, you know, the original Apollo missions. And yeah, that original Earthrise image clearly had a massive cultural impact and legacy. This new image can't hope to touch that. But still, it is, you know, a moment, an event that people see a lot of positivity and hope and good things rather than bad things. And even if actually there's, again, a backstory that has to do with geopolitics and America competing with China rather than competing with Russia, that's a big part of the story. But nonetheless, we can all kind of embrace what, as you say, Richard, it's a very human story. As humans, we can all imagine ourselves, you know, in that little capsule, looking with wonder at our usually distant companion that these very lucky people have got to see an awful lot closer. Yeah, the human story is a wonderful thing.
You're right, the human story is what makes this more dramatic than anything. But, you know, for tech people like us, I quite like the vehicles as well. And I'd love to see the SLS fly and the other bits. But I've got a couple of observations. Right, the first one is, isn't the European service module great? Do you remember when it was called ATV? It was the European Automatic Transfer Vehicle, which was used to carry supplies to the space station, the ISS, a few years ago. And it's great that it's been repurposed because it's a joint mission. It's not a pure American mission, Richard, is it?
No, we mustn't forget that. It's actually a joint NASA, Canadian, European Space Agency mission, you know, hence the Canadian astronaut on board. But yeah, the service module, the astronauts would not be alive without the service module. The service module, it's half the spacecraft. You've got Orion and you've got the service module. And as you say, it's based on the ATV, the sort of delivery truck to the space station. And you can see that in the configuration of this sort of X configuration of the solar arrays on it.
Yeah.
And I've spoken to engineers who've worked on it and they are so proud, you know, that it's, you know, it's been built in Europe, it's European technology, and they've already built the one that will go on the Orion that should take astronauts to the moon. So yeah, this one and this one itself, it was actually constructed during COVID. This is a socially distanced constructed service module. And they, you know, I was talking to one of the engineers and she said that they had real problems getting the engineers who were working on it from Italy. So it's a joint sort of European project. They had to go from Italy to Germany.
Alenia and
Thales Alenia Space and Airbus. So Airbus, they had to get them to Bremen in Germany where they were assembled. So so it's a socially distanced constructed spacecraft.
It was basically ESA's lockdown project.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Do you know what? I remember when ATV used to fly, hoping that, because there was some talk about it becoming a European crew module attached to it. They were exploring, do you remember Hermes, that very small European shuttle? They were exploring Europe having its own vehicle. And at one point there was going to be an ATV, a crewed ATV. That never happened, but it's happened now in conjunction with Orion. So big up the European Space Agency. As Europeans, you know, we love that. But here's the thing, right? Isn't the interim cryogenic upper stage rubbish?
Why do you say that, Gareth?
Well, I'm wondering if that has to do with... I have a couple of vehicle questions for Richard. I'm wondering if this has to do with...
Okay, go on then.
With one of my questions. Well, my first question was going to be, can you clarify exactly what happened with the toilet on the...
It was a filter issue, wasn't it?
I've had slightly conflicting reports.
We always end up talking about toilets. We all do it on space programs.
Famously, whenever you have, and Richard knows this better than anybody, when you have, any kind of public Q&A with an astronaut or a space specialist, the first question is almost invariably about
how do you go to the toilet?
How do you go to the toilet in space?
Yeah.
And apparently there was a problem with the toilet on this mission. So can you actually clear up exactly what happened with the toilet?
The short answer is no, because I don't know exactly what happened. I don't think they've given us an exact answer. I know there was a problem with the water because there was a valve that was stuck open. So that's why they've had to put water aside. But when I was just thinking about the toilet, you see it sort of deconstructed and you see an engine, so the RS-25, which we've mentioned, this really vastly complicated, brilliant rocket motor. You see the two side by side. Honestly, the toilet is more complicated than the rocket.
There are more moving parts.
There are more moving parts. There's a very complicated suction system, which is obviously crucial.
Yeah, maybe.
So, there was a glitch with the toilet. There was a glitch with the water. And I think of the two, the water was probably the more worrying of the two, which is why you maybe saw at some point they were decanting a lot of water out into storage vessels in case there was a problem pumping water from the tanks in the service module to the actual dispenser in the Orion capsule. So that's why they needed to put the water to one side. I don't know the exact problems with the toilet. I can investigate on your behalf because NASA are normally pretty good at getting back to us. But they were very keen to stress. I heard this all the way through the day, all the way through the press conference. Jared Isaacman, the head of NASA, calling it a test mission.
Yeah. That's what it is.
What was so interesting, actually, the press conference after the launch, it wasn't really celebratory. It was like stage one passed, successful launch to orbit. But that was only successful launch to orbit. So the next stage was, can we get out of orbit? Is the spacecraft in sufficiently good shape to get out of orbit and head to the moon? The translunar injection decision. And Isaacman kept saying that he wouldn't celebrate, this wasn't a triumph, or he wasn't going to say, he'll say positive words, obviously, about it. It's going really well. But he won't say it's a triumph or a success until the astronauts are safely back on dry land.
Correct.
So I thought that was really interesting. And they just kept saying test mission, test mission, test mission, which means they can hide behind any, glitches, like the toilet not working properly.
I'm reminded of John F. Kennedy's famous speech, which ends something along the lines of put men on the moon and return them safely to the Earth. And it ain't over till it's over. We'll talk about the landing and we'll get to that presently. But I want to come back to why I think the interim cryogenic propulsion stage is rubbish.
Go on.
Right. First of all, it is rubbish because it could only just put the Orion spacecraft and service module around the moon. It only just had enough delta V to do that and was designed as such. I'm being jocular here. But the reason why I think it's rubbish is that they've called it the interim cryogenic. It's like, this'll do for now. We'll have a better one soon. They can use a Delta 5 motor, aren't they, I believe, for the upper stage. Is it the Centaur? Is that what they call it? I can't remember now. But it's a proper shove halfpenny kind of motor that'll be able to put a significantly heavier load into lunar orbit, because of course you've got to slow down to achieve lunar orbit and you've got to slow down to land. So we've got a long way to go. This whole point, Richard, of it being a test mission, reminds me of Apollo 7 rather than Apollo 8, the first time humans had ridden a vehicle that hadn't been human rated before. And the next mission is going to be a test mission as well, but it's very sketchy. This episode is called Artemis and Beyond, right? So beyond this Artemis mission, Artemis 3 is scheduled for what, 2027?
Unbelievably, 2027, to test in low Earth orbit the lander. Well, I haven't seen a lander. Have you seen a lander? Anyone seen
what
a lander?
No.
That was going to be my question, Well, as I understand it, both SpaceX and Blue Origin are in the running to provide however many landers NASA are going to want for continued Artemis missions. But it seems to be unclear whether it will be SpaceX or Blue Origin or both of them. And also unclear, at least to me at the moment, is how exactly the different elements of that landing mission will fit together, because Starship is not designed to fit on top of an SLS.
No.
Are they going to fly SLS and Orion to lunar orbit and then rendezvous with a Starship that's been refueled in Earth orbit to get, what can you tell us about the plans for actually getting those astronauts' boots onto the moon?
Well, I can tell you what the plan was, and I'm not sure I can tell you what the plan now is. So the plan was, until about a month ago actually, was to launch Orion towards the moon and in parallel launch a load of Starships into low Earth orbit to refuel one that would go on to the moon and become the lander. At least that's how I understood it, what it was going to be. I mean, it was a load of Starships, and it was very unclear how many, because you just had to keep getting the fuel up and the fuel up and the fuel up to get to the moon. Now...
I think 15 was the number I heard.
Okay, yeah, I'd heard slightly more than that, but yeah. But that... Park that idea. So that's the plan, the original plan. But now with this new announcement, well, we'll test the lander in low Earth orbit first, which is like Apollo 9, actually, where they tested the whole Apollo system because the lander wasn't ready for Apollo 8. So they thought, right, we'll send Apollo 8 round the moon and we'll test the lander in low Earth orbit with Apollo 9. So if there was a lander, say, from Blue Origin, which was a more conventional sort of lander, then maybe you just launch that separately into low Earth orbit, rendezvous in low Earth orbit, and then head to the moon. Very much like Apollo in a way, only you're not taking the lander and the crew capsule on the same rocket up. So that could work. I don't know whether that's the current thinking. This is now coming from top down. So NASA is now saying, this is what we are going to do. To do this, there had to be a massive acceleration on Starship and reliability on Starship, if that's going to have SpaceX Starship. I mean, they are building a new launch pad at Cape Canaveral for Starship, but yeah, as we know, it's going to be a long process before that is going to fly safely. So I don't know. I don't think anyone knows at the moment. When I've done interviews with NASA, they've really absolutely dodged the question. And I'm sorry I'm dodging the question now, but I don't think anyone knows the answer to this. I mean, we don't know what's going on in Blue Origin. I drove past, it's a big factory they have just outside sort of Titusville, which is where, Cape Canaveral is. Big factory, big Blue Origin factory. No idea what's going on in there. But I'm sure they are very much working on a lander, and I imagine it's not dissimilar to the original sort of lunar lander from Apollo, because that'll get America to the moon quickly.
That's the thing, isn't it? As I understand it, Blue Moon, which is Blue Origin's lander, which is, I've built a model out of champagne cork
really
and
nice
stuff of. That is a fairly... It's pretty accurate, really, in some bizarre way. But that will put 4 people on the lunar surface for a short period, and I believe Blue Origin would like to launch that on their New Glenn rocket. There's been no talk of it being lofted on a SpaceX Falcon, of course. There's no possibility of it going up within a Starship. It's not going to go on SLS. There are other lifters that it could use. Probably the ULA, one of their rockets, could put it up. Vulcan, is it big enough to get it up there? Who knows? But it's very sketchy, considering that it's supposed to happen in the next 12 months or 18 months, right? That isn't going to happen.
It's extraordinary. I mean, unless there could well be a lot going on that we don't know about. I would imagine there is.
Yeah, let's hope.
And yeah, I just can't. I would love for this timetable to work out. And Isaacman is very impressive and very much loved by the commercial space community as well. He commanded the first full all-private space flight.
Yeah.
He knows what he's doing. He is an astronaut. He's a proper astronaut. He's flown in a SpaceX. He is much loved by the private space community. He is much loved by the venture capitalists that are funding all this work. So, he's not some technocrat coming in to run NASA with a public service background. He is a very wealthy entrepreneur who is now running NASA, who understands a lot of these things. So I think if anyone can make this particular thing happen, it is probably him or the people he is appointing around him.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting you say that, because in as much as Isaacman has made an impression in this relatively brief time, it's been that he's someone who's very focused on getting the job done, on practicalities, on the bare facts of the matter.
Good manager.
At the expense of sort of, maybe not always being overly diplomatic. And I mean, I think, with, for example, the Boeing report and the way they were dealing with assessing the performance of Boeing's Starliner capsule, and just how critical he was and the report were, and how straightforward he was about being clear that this was just a massive failure and not something you can really equivocate too much about. We need to do much, much, much better than this if we're going to achieve our human spaceflight and other goals in space. And in rejigging the timetable for these missions, I mean, there was this, for people that don't know, one of the things that Isaacman-led NASA has done in rejigging the Artemis missions is essentially adding more missions into the schedule so that more rockets are going up. There's a more rapid rate of chucking rockets into space, which will help to basically keep everyone at expert level, at ready level, keep the institutional knowledge of how to do these things.
Sort of match ready, aren't they? They're like competition fit.
Exactly, yeah. Rather than every 3 or 4 years going, we've got to launch another rocket. How do we do that again?
Yeah, I've forgotten how to do it.
That's really important because, he said, and you make the point about Starliner, I mean, he categorised Starliner, the Starliner, we were, I suppose, the media almost downplaying it. Because the astronauts were safe. It was almost like a joke story. They were stuck in space. Yeah. But, that was categorised as the same as the Challenger and Columbia, where the crew were lost.
What do they call it? A level 1 incident?
Level A, I think it was.
Level A,
category A. I think it was category
A.
But you make a really good point, Zog, about the rapidity of not just launching one of these SLS rockets every 3 or 4 years, where you lose that expertise. Because, Isaacman said, we had exactly the same problems with the hydrogen and the helium on Artemis 1, the test mission that we didn't put astronauts on. You can imagine him in the meeting saying, well, how is this happening again? This is exactly what happened last time. Then they have to roll it back and then it's all delayed. It's bad publicity. It doesn't get things moving. And so, by launching these in a much, much greater rapidity, and they are, they're churning them out of the factory. I also learned they're starting to build the engines again. So
I was about to come to that.
This.
Yeah, the RS-25, because they're going to run out of second-hand used shuttle engines, and they're going for what they call production restart or something with the R25E, which has got to be an improved version.
The SLS that launched, so it has 4 of these engines in the main sort of core stage. 3 of them were the best shuttle engines, so they have flown on space shuttles. So they always recycle them between space shuttles. So they couldn't say which shuttles necessarily they went on, but they were categorized as the best performing engines in the space shuttle program. And one of them was one of the spares. So they had 3 that have flown before into space, and one of them was a spare. But now they are just developing the next generation. They are such a good engine. They're so reliable. And it could actually launch, as looking at the various contingencies, it could launch on 3, actually. So there is a contingency that it would manage on, they just burn them longer, but it can actually launch on 3. They're so good. It's great technology. It's solid technology. It's proven technology. And this is the problem with Starship, isn't it? We see them blow up, or we see them not quite work, or we see them not reach orbit, or we see them blow up the launch pad. Eventually, I'm sure Starship will be great, but it's not there now. This is there now.
It's a long way. Yeah.
We're seeing all of the problems in Starship being very publicly, worked out.
But then that's admirable, I think. I think it's great, that we're seeing... This is that, we don't know what the Chinese are doing. They could have a moon-ready rocket now. We just don't know.
Richard, we're on the same page. I was about to say exactly that.
Let's talk about that.
Chandler 7 and 8 are planned to land in the South Pole in the end of this year, I believe. Again, Mengzhou, which is Dream Vessel, their crew cabin, their equivalent of Orion or Apollo, that has been flown recently without crew. It's been tested. Lanyu, which is the Chinese moon lander, is being developed, and there are pictures of that. And of course, the vehicle that will take them up there, Long March 10, has now had, I believe, 2, possibly 1, but it's had test flights and it works. They're on to the China space program. We're talking about what they call Phase 4, the Lunar Robotic Research Station. So they're going to do an awful lot more autonomous surveys of the moon and put lots of little landers on the moon, or medium-sized landers with very useful rovers and robots, and I mean a worker robot that will be able to establish the Chinese base. Right, America better get its finger out. Has it got the will? Has it got the money money to sustain this.
It's so interesting, isn't it? You've got basically the move fast and break things culture in the US, where we're seeing, a series of rockets fail, we're seeing landers fail, bit hit and miss with the landers, they're getting better and better, all these private companies developing landers, some work, some don't. And then this really slow and steady progression of the Chinese space program. The big issue, and it was the same with the first space race with the Soviet Union, you only hear about the successes. So, like you said, you've reeled off the plan. We don't know what's going on behind the scenes of the Chinese space program. I mean, they were forced to almost confess that they had a problem with the space station recently, where they had, that crack in the window of their spacecraft and had to come back. Yeah. But that's the exception. We don't know all the problems. Whereas we can watch a live stream of astronauts in orbit around the moon, washing, and, it's not filtered. This is a live feed from space. You can watch on a daily basis. There's still astronauts on the space station. We can watch them doing their experiments. It's really dull, but you can watch them do that. It's all public. It's all out there, as are the failures. And even SpaceX, Elon Musk's company, which is notoriously secret. They certainly don't deal with the press. But, all this stuff is out in the open. You can see the damage. You can see what happens when things go wrong.
In my experience of doing any research on space stuff, the Chinese Space Agency was always the hardest to get any information out of, and Chinese space missions were always the hardest to get any information on, pictures, whatever. Yeah, Roscosmos, the Russian agency, an absolute joy to deal with compared to the Chinese Space Agency. As you say, we don't know what the Chinese are doing with their human spaceflight program and their plans to go to the moon, which are undoubtedly there. But we do know some things. I mean, we do know, that they tend to, as you say, Gareth, move quite cautiously and slowly rather than announcing big plans which then repeatedly fail to happen, which is what NASA has largely done with its moon plans in the last couple of decades. We do know that China now has many years experience of keeping humans, keeping taikonauts, as the Chinese call their astronauts, keeping them alive in low Earth orbit. And if you've got experience of running missions for weeks in low Earth orbit, you've got some of the essential knowledge that you need to get people to the moon and back. I mean, a big part of it is keeping them alive in that little box.
Absolutely.
A long way from Earth. And we know that their rocket, their launcher technology is only advancing and getting more sophisticated. And they've been landing more rovers on the moon. Yeah. So their pathway it's there. The elements are all coming together. And, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I suspect that China could put people on the moon before America if they really want to. I think it's probably as much a question of how much they want to as anything else. Would you agree with that? Or am I maybe reading too much into what China possibly has behind the scenes and what they're not telling us?
Yeah, I mean, I think the whole thing is basically a product of different political systems, isn't it? Where you have basically, the same government in power, you can have a long-term plan, which is what the Chinese have got. Whereas NASA have been pushed around in terms of, how this has changed. Without wishing to politicise this, I saw, there was a congratulations from Barack Obama, for example. Well, he cancelled the original moon program. This moon program actually was Donald Trump's doing in his first term. And it kind of limped along through the Biden presidency, and now it's back with this new purpose. And NASA's always had that issue. The way it's been pushed around, we saw it in the 60s. By the time astronauts landed on the moon with Apollo 11, the funding had already been cut by the Nixon administration.
Nixon wasn't interested, was he?
Yeah.
The old balls and his big face speaking to you on the moon. I'm not really interested in what you're doing. Nixon. Yeah, you did right.
Uncanny.
You're dead right, Richard. The way that the Chinese are approaching this, they're putting together all these subtle elements, and their mission is to win the gold rush, the lunar gold rush, which is what's happening at the moment. There are valuable resources on the moon, isotopes of helium, water which will give you hydrogen and oxygen, and there may be other stuff up there as well. It's a great observation place. It's a great psychological thing to be able to say to your rival nations on Earth, no, we have a permanent base on the moon. And the Chinese are doing that by robotically researching where they're going to profit the most, right? So it's the South Pole and the far side. Very interesting. And once they've done that, bang, they'll go. America is still struggling to put things, all nations, apart from China, are struggling to land things safely on the moon. Intuitive machines, and there was an Israeli attempt, wasn't there? And there's been another one, I forget their names. Oh, what are they called? Astrobiotic.
Astrobiotic.
The well-known yogurt, yes.
We've been to their factory in Pittsburgh and seen their work on the next lander. So their next lander's due to land in the summer. This is another NASA program, and it's that whole, throw some money at private companies and they will hopefully get a lander that lands on the moon. But it's proving to be really hard. Yeah, it's really hard.
I've got all my fingers crossed. It is proving to be very hard. So I remember many, many, many years ago, do you remember the Ansari Lunar X Prize?
I do, yes.
You suggested to me at one point that we should consider entering it because you said, how hard could it be to put a Tamiya radio control car on the lunar surface?
I 100% said that. I think it was basically my 10-second thought process on this was, well, come on, all you've got to do basically is take some kind of radio controlled car, stick it in a box, having adapted a bit and probably slightly boosted the power of your transmitter, find someone to dump it on the moon for you, and you've done the job. Sure, there are going to be a few little things in there that you need to upgrade, you need to get right, but that's fiddling small detail. Yeah, no, that was absolutely what I said.
See, now it's almost like Elon Musk is in the room. It's,
I did subsequently realise that probably the accumulation of the fiddling small detail that makes it more complicated is exactly why all this stuff is so incredibly complicated and actually very expensive.
It's so interesting with that prize. They never awarded it. No one did it.
No.
That just shows how hard it is.
Which exactly brings me to my final statement for the programme. Make it appear as if John F. Kennedy is in the room. What did he say? We choose to go to the moon and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because we thought they would be easy. No, because they were hard, right? It is hard. The engineering and the coordination and the logistics and the whole support structure. Great that Goonhilly Base Station in Cornwall is playing a role in Artemis. They're not home yet. They're going to return to Earth. Is it Friday night, Saturday morning, about 1 o'clock in the morning, UK time? We're recording the show on Tuesday, right? They're still in cislunar space on their way back, accelerating as they traverse the gulf between the moon and Earth. And by the time they reach Earth, they'll be doing 25,000 miles per hour, which is going to be a bit of a test for the Orion heat shield. How confident are we?
I wouldn't want to. I mean, there was, yes, as you allude to, there were problems with the original spacecraft, but it got back. I mean, it got back intact, but it was more. They used the word ablated. There was more scorched than they expected. There is no way they would put astronauts in this spacecraft, particularly after we heard, we talk about Starliner. There's no way they would put astronauts in the spacecraft if we are not confident in the spacecraft returning to Earth safely and the astronauts being able to be recovered. So, they would have every confidence in this. And I think it's proved, so far we've had the glitches with the toilet, we had glitches with water. I mean, all these things are to be expected. It's doing pretty well.
We also had the glitch with Outlook Express. There was there was the incident when they had to get to IT support to help them out with Microsoft software.
I loved they had problems with that and the GoPro, because Jeremy Hansen was saying he couldn't get the settings to save, and I think I have exactly the same problem with my GoPro. I can't get this. I can't work out, and it uses a huge amount of battery. So that was quite reassuring, I thought.
It's good to know that even astronauts are famously good at problem solving. If they can't figure it out, you're definitely not doing anything
This
wrong.
mission has been brought to you by GoPro and Krispy Kreme Donuts. In some way are sponsors of Artemis. Did you know this? They've got special donuts available in Florida that are Artemis themed. I think they're themed after the different crew members or something like that.
Oh, cool.
Apple must be celebrating because everyone is saying the same thing. The best picture we've seen so far was that one taken on the iPhone of the moon. So big up Apple PR department for supplying that. Who else is involved? Well, not Omega anymore. They used to supply watches for Lunarnauts, didn't they? Wondering who it is now.
Are you sure they're not still involved? To the astronauts was wearing an Omega X33
Are they?
Speedmaster, which is the current iteration of the...
They are certainly wearing
sort of
proper
moon watch.
watches.
Isn't that true?
Yeah, I think I'd need to check that, but they're certainly wearing proper watches. I couldn't see the exact model, but they're wearing proper watches on one side and then a monitor, and I'm not sure what company provided the monitor, but it's like a, Fitbit type monitor. Not an Apple Watch, interestingly, but some sort of monitor. I can't remember which type
Heart
of
monitor,
it
health
was.
monitor.
Yeah, sort of health monitor.
So,
Yeah, probably.
you're just checking that, Zog. I can see you typing there.
Yeah, I am. Yes, they have all been issued Omega Speedmaster X33
Okay.
second
Yeah.
generation.
Yeah.
Wow.
Which is, it's a bit of a hybrid in that it has, I think, analog hands, although it has a quartz movement and a digital display integrated into it.
Wow.
Which I think there's a Breitling pilot's watch that has a similar analog digital hybrid that's quite, I remember clocking a while back. I'm not sure if that one's been into space.
It is interesting, the commercial side of this as well. So, for example, there's going to be... So, keep mentioning the GoPro, but the reason they've got the GoPros is for National Geographic. So that is being filmed for National Geographic. They put a tender out to who's going to do the documentary. National Geographic won that tender. So, that's why they are filming sort of 360-degree views inside the spacecraft in HD, in 4K, whatever. So that will turn into a film ultimately, which presumably National Geographic will be able to monetize. And of course Nutella, which was nice to see, the Nutella jar spinning around. Yeah,
Chocolate in
Yeah,
space.
I'm not a Nutella guy. If they'd had Marmite up there, that would have been a whole different deal.
Even.
But no, you can.
I'm
you
not
can kick
sure.
your Nutella.
Would Marmite be safe in space? If it got warm, it could gloop out
It's
everywhere,
as safe
couldn't
as
it?
Nutella. I mean,
Yeah.
they're
I
both
suppose they're
gloopy.
similar
Yeah,
consistency,
they're
aren't
both
they?
gloopy
Yeah.
things
Well,
in
original
jars.
astronaut space food not original, but the stuff that they developed for Skylab was designed to be as sticky as possible to stay in the pots so it wouldn't float around. And so that stickiness is probably a very good thing on orbit or in zero-G or low-G environments. Two things very, very briefly. Richard, you know that this podcast is essentially about cars, but we often do space things because we're obsessed. It's all speed, right? It's all speed. I was looking into crossover between cars and space missions to see, was there any crossover? And I discovered two things. The most obvious one is that the engines of the late lamented Saturn V were called F1.
Ah, very good.
Perfect, right? F1. I mean, that's a great name for the highest performance engines. And the second one, which I had no idea about. First of all, remember before the Saturn V, there was a Saturn 1B, which could lift the Apollo command module and service module into low Earth orbit. It was used for Apollo 7, the ASTP, Skylab. But that rocket, I had no idea, was simply 8 Redstone rockets that we use for Alan Shepard, which were developed from the V2, strapped together. That's all that was. But that's not the amazing car-related fact. The amazing car-related fact about that is it was built by what is now Stellantis, Chrysler. I had no idea Chrysler built rockets, and I hope they continue to do that. I hope everyone builds rockets. We have more crewed missions to the planet so we can do this again and talk about one of our favourite things. Zog, it's always a joy talking with you. Space and cars, it's all
Love
we
talking
talk about.
space. Yeah. Let's hope we can do it again before too long.
Yeah, but Richard, what a thrill to have you on the show, man. And I hate you for having been there at the launch.
Well, sorry you hate me, but it's been an absolute pleasure to be on the podcast. I can't believe I've never been on your podcast. It's such a good one.
Well, we do try.
too kind.
We do try. Yours is too. Listen to Space Boffins. I'll put a link up on the page for this episode.
Great show.
Richard, will you come back and talk Artemis 3 when it happens?
I would love to. Yeah.
Done.
I mean, maybe next year.
Yeah. Well,
Maybe.
Let's
Fingers
see.
crossed.
Let's see. But for now, Zog, thank you.
Great pleasure. Bye-bye.
And Richard, thank you.
Cheers.
Science speed, guys, and happy landings to the Artemis crew. We'll be watching. Hope you are too. See you for another On Speed in 2 weeks.
If you enjoyed this show, then please like, share and subscribe. For information on how to contact the show, see pictures, read song lyrics, follow us on social media, or to sponsor this podcast, go to garethjones.tv. Gareth Jones on Speed is made in Wales by Whiz Bang.
Gareth Jones on Speed!